Can you tell me about the role you played, what your character had been through?
I played a character named Lieutenant Wayne Wright. He was in the Marines and he plays the trombone. And he suffered from like a severe case of contact OCD. Um, so it wasn't so much like habits and rituals that were the issue, but like I always carried around like a hanky or like a rag of some sort, and like everything had to be clean. And then it's kind of revealed and alluded to as the show goes on that he's like very suicidal.
I played the role of Davies Laddick, who was a bass player, war veteran, and alcoholic. His character liberated the concentration camp at Dachau, and the play suggests that that has plays a large part in why Davy drinks the way he does.
I played a character named Johnny Simpson who had served in the Army as a private. But Johnny had been in a Jeep accident where the Jeep turned 3 times. He had a back injury that also had sort of a neurological component. So he had suffered some fairly significant memory loss. His socialization, his memory of words as they're communicated within a conversation, um, were not easy for him.
Have you ever experienced war directly in any way?
War?
Yeah.
No.
Personally, have not been super affected by war. I think we are all being affected by war kind of all the time, and to see images of unimaginable violence like we're just flooded with all the time now, I don't know, it clued me in, I guess, a little bit about what might have traumatized my character.
I have not experienced war directly, but I also feel like at the same time that's kind of a tricky question because who hasn't?
We all witness certain effects of war. It affects our lives in really significant ways, sometimes that we don't even realize or aren't talked about.
Was young enough, yet still old enough to like comprehend what was going on. For 9/11, I was in kindergarten, and having my entire extended family being from New York City, and like my parents were still close with the city at that time, definitely have witnessed what it's like to have family members or people you care about be disrupted by war activities.
Did you know a lot about that time in history before doing the show?
World War II specifically, no. Besides what they really tell you in American high school, which is painted in a really interesting light.
To be frank, I think a lot of the history that I learned in high school, I quickly forgot after the standardized tests were over.
Where are some places that you went to for that information? Like, who were the people you talked to?
Especially if you don't have a lot of experience on the stage, or even if you do, you kind of have to start with how well you know yourself and what's truthful, and then you do the research. And with the research, a lot of it comes down to what is going to translate into behavior on stage. Like if the research doesn't produce behavior, then it's not really useful to you as an actor.
I think I had to play on experiences of older people that I knew, right? And so, like, my grandfather was a big one, like, very similar to this character in the way of, like, kind of stoic, kind of domineering, but also, like, gonna be the dad of the group. Also very particular. I picked up, like, the military precision, not only from him, but from other friends or friends, fathers and grandfathers that I've known who've been in the military. Like, they're very precise, very particular. And so, like, that aspect of the control part of the OCD, I definitely drew upon.
Do you have any family members that experienced war?
So, my grandfather was in the Air Force in the Vietnam War, and although he wasn't like super forthcoming with a lot of the bad stories, I did kind of get glimpses throughout, like his life and what he would decide to share. So I mean, you kind of hear about that. I did look at one photo and one photo only because it kind of like holds a lot. It was a picture of my grandfather in his Air Force uniform from when he was probably around my age at this point, if not younger. And it's strange because as I've gotten older, I've started to look a little bit more like him. And like once the mustache came in, like for the show, and I had to get my hair cut, I had like a buzz cut and the whole thing. And it was strange because I brought this photo in for our producer because the producers wanted to see like any sort of family relations we had and like to honor the veterans in our lives. So I brought the photo in, and like a lot of my castmates and the producer, they were like, "You look just like him," and it's something I hadn't really connected before until I think I like got the mustache and the haircut, and then it like all kind of fell into place. So I used that photo a lot to just kind of like get into it. It was in my dressing room too.
On my father's side, his experience, he grew up in a completely different country. He was pretty severely disadvantaged, probably by war as a child. He grew up in Pakistan when it was kind of just forming as a country. So he was technically born in India, and it was all like it was fluid, I guess. I don't know, but he that war was going on, and his parents had put him in an orphanage, like when he was very young, dealing with my father. And every time you hear a story you get a different version, and a lot of gaps and details about his family life, and when he was reunited with his family. And like war certainly destabilized kind of the core of his life. So if my character had an accident, but if you're somebody who's been experienced by war, or has had that experience of war, who's been affected by war in that way, it's I don't even know where the bottom of it is. And to have somebody who's impacted by any kind of like a global destabilization, or regional destabilization, which that was, is going to have severe and significant consequences on your life, whether that parent is around or not. Because if not, then it's like that parent not being around is a big deal. But if that parent's around and is going through a lot of significant problems, psychosis, what have you, then it just adds to your own sense of confusion about the world and how things work. Like that's going to have severe, it could, or just, it's going to affect your life in some way, probably.
You were doing this musical, did you think of them at all?
Yeah, I did. Although not always maybe in the ways that you would expect.
Why do you say in the way I wouldn't expect?
Well, I think approaching bandstand and the character, as I am someone who hasn't directly been affected by war like some people have, I think I had to reach into other types of traumas, if that makes sense, to come close to maybe the feelings that they were getting after.
What were some of those things?
One of them, so my character, Davy, like I said, has a problematic relationship with alcohol, largely, as a result of what he saw in the war. So, I am someone who has had a lot of family members have problematic relationships with alcohol. And so, while the way David presents is a little different than maybe some of the ways that my family members presented, like I think maybe they were a little less fun than Davy was, I was able to reach into some of my feelings about that stuff, and my own feelings about habits and addictions that I might have experienced in my life. And then the other side of it, the war side of it, is that no, I never, surprise, I've never seen combat myself. However, through this whole process, all that I saw on the news was pictures of, children's bodies burning and stuff, and that's horrific.
There were other actors playing like ex-soldiers in this band. Did you talk to them at all? Or did you guys collaborate at all when you were trying to like build this story and build your guys' characters?
Absolutely. We had several sit-down sessions, both alone and with our director and with our music directors, choreographers, things like that. There was kind of this underlying theme of like male expression of trauma, right? So I think it was focused more upon those interpersonal relationships. And so we did have a lot of discussions as to like who's closest in this group, who brought in who. So you have to find out like who's got the deepest pair bonds through all of that. And it was just all relationship dynamics. It wasn't so much war focused, but then like what we were going to do with each other now that our characters were out of the war.
I can remember specific instances which were probably working with Patrick, who played a saxophone player who was in the Navy, I believe, and then Cameron, my friend who plays the drums. The three of us as sort of the non-actors of the group, the non-career actors of the group, had to get together a lot and talk about how we dig deeper into characters like this, because none of us had that experience.
So before actually going on stage, like, was there any kind of like moment you had to take, or were you able to just go into that?
As an actor, sometimes people will try to do before they're on stage something that's called like an emotional preparation or something similar to that, in which they're thinking about something, imagining a circumstance, imagining. Usually it's a hypothetical circumstance. Some people do that with like they'll go into their memory and find things about them but they'll do that before a scene, and then they'll go on stage, and like when you go on stage you drop it. You've already kind of revved yourself up for something, but the idea is you go out on stage and you've dropped it and you're really just responding to the other people on stage.
I think we all were standing in place about 5 minutes before we went out every time. That moment, I think, for a lot of us was kind of the moment that we had to like change our headspace and get as close to battle ready, I guess, as you could hope to be as a actor.
Was there anything you did?
I breathed a lot. I think I probably. I think a lot of the time I was like, all right, I'm in the war. It's very scary. It's in the foxholes. It's scary. It was a lot of like, I don't know. I don't live a scary life. Nothing about my life is very scary. I got a shot today. That was the most I've been in pain in a long time. It's difficult. I'm also not aggressive. I'm not terribly masculine. I'm not much of a fighter as it is. So to try to put myself in the headspace of someone who is shooting and being shot at is that was challenging. It was just very hard. Yeah.
It's a story about musicians.
Yes.
And you're playing live on stage.
Yes, we are playing live. We were playing live.
So you're a musician in real life off the stage.
Yes.
How was doing something that you do all the time off stage, but on a stage in character?
Yes, I definitely thought about that. My character had a physical impediment. The drums are a very physical instrument. So if I have trouble turning this way or this way, it's going to influence how I play the drums. What you do as an actor generally is construct symptoms, and you find a way into those and play those in a way that is clear and truthful, but also like recognizable from a visual standpoint, auditory standpoint, whatever is applicable, to the audience. So for my character, what that meant is when I'm playing the drums, I can't, or speaking to people, I can't do a lot of side-to-side motion from here. I had to kind of use my peripheral vision or use my lower body or my legs to make significant. When I was playing the drums, because my character plays the drums.
So you're a musician in real life.
That is correct, yes.
How is doing an activity you do all the time, but in a character?
That was interesting. Playing the bass as his character, I didn't honestly change much about my body language, the way I play the instrument, the musical choices that I make, because that's a place where I think me doing what I already do turned out to embody Davy very well. One of the struggles with Davy for me, and one of the things that the director and the assistant director and kind of everybody kept coming back to was Davy needs to be big, he needs to be bigger, he needs to be really big, he needs to be, loud and strong and assertive. So as soon as I got the gig for it, the first thing they mentioned was like, this is the character description. It is obviously not you. So we need to do everything we can to make you, play up the role of this big guy. And yeah, that's not really how I am in real life. But when I play my bass, I move a lot, I smile a lot, I make noises, I, dance and get silly, and that part was just easy. In playing the bass, I might have connected with Davey the best in some of those moments.
From 5th grade, I think, I picked up the trombone and I played all throughout college. I'm naturally a very tall person, and I've been told at least that I kind of always have my shoulders back and my chest out. And through my marching band training, I always kind of played that way. And I did try and play everything really tall. My feet were always together. I played up into the house, into the audience, right? So that's how I differentiated that. Wayne, my character, is still really uptight. He's never going to fully relax into that. That's just not his thing. So I was physically mindful of that, but it's something I already naturally did at some point in my life as an instrumentalist.
Would you say there's some kind of physicality of a soldier there?
Absolutely, especially a Marine, 100%. And that was a big talk through we did. Our director was also our choreographer, which is great for a show like this because you need to have a bodily awareness, I think, for each of those lead characters. And even though our characters, the bandmates, if you will, weren't big dancers, we still had to work on our physicality a lot. So Joe, the director choreographer's name, he definitely gave us pinpoints on what he wanted to see. He let us run with it, but he gave us points on what he wanted to see, and very much so. I was still supposed to be little drummer boy, Marine. I have never fully left that, and it's maybe something that's always been a part of my character's life and physicality before he was in the military and after. That's just always how his life has been.
Did you feel that you were playing, or that your character was playing, or was it one and the same for you?
That's actually, it's a good question, and a little bit of both, but mostly me, and this is why. While I was doing the same job I tend to do in my day-to-day life, the feeling of the music, the forms of the music, and the lyrical content, really all of it is more music theater than jazz. So getting used to playing that kind of caricature of jazz was also challenging in the same way of playing the character of Davy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of goes back to a little bit of both. I think you have to decide what points of yourself to put in the character and then really let those shine so that you don't have to do a whole lot of work. That brings across a lot more truth, a lot more authenticity. But I did also have to be mindful when to rein it in or when maybe to switch it a little bit to a more stoic Wayne Wright character. But after a while, it's just muscle memory. So by the time we started running the show, that was kind of ingrained. It was more choreographed than it was acting.
Is there anything during this process that your present self connected with?
I could relate to my character on a personal level in a number of ways because a lot of the circumstances in my life, in my home situation, in my the way in which I could interface or not interface with society in general at various phases of my life really lined up with this guy.
There are elements of Davy that I can really relate to. Like I said, I've got experience with, people with alcoholism, and unfortunately, the people that I know with alcoholism were not nearly as fun as Davy. So the alcoholism in my family is more like quiet and not even aggressive necessarily, but just like not happy. You know what I mean? I almost had to kind of make up the character of a fun drunk, if that makes sense. The alcohol piece was probably where I dug the deepest in terms of my relationship to the material, which is, basically thinking Davy does not act like the people I know with alcoholism, but has the same disease and so has similar motivations and has similar traumas, and creating that character was kind of taking pieces of all of the alcoholics that I know and trying to make them as fun as possible.
Oh, absolutely. I completely relate to a lot of the OCD tendencies. Any sort of cleanliness thing. I've always had a really big tactile issue, sensory issues, if my hands are sticky or anything like that. So much so that I was so relieved when my character had a prop that was a rag or a towel that he always had on himself, so he could wipe his hands, wipe his face, wipe his instrument off. If anything's a little greasy on my trombone, it bothers me. So I was very easily able to play that small anxiety, quiet panic internally when things are a little bit messed up. Even before, we'd walk on stage and I would constantly be fixing Dave's collar. I would just double check everyone's costume before we would run out for whatever scene we were doing. I didn't realize that a lot of that I do behind the scenes is also just what Wayne would do as well.
So you think throughout this process you've become, you feel you understand a little bit more the people in the time that you portrayed, those older generations that might be long gone, but you feel you understand them a little bit more now, and that you can maybe connect with people that you didn't connect with before.
To a degree, I think there were elements of Davy that I already understood, but had to find out why or how I understood. And then there were the elements of Davy that I would never directly fully be able to understand, which is the war side of things. And I think I got as close to feeling that as one could in 8 days or over the course of a month of rehearsal. But it's war is horrifying, man. I can't pretend like I'm a tenth of the way to understanding.
You could do all the research in the world that there is to do on what life was like for veterans in World War II or the war. But, if you get on stage and you're not honestly responding to the other people, and you're not doing something because something made you do it, you're just trying to push it, then it's not going to be truthful or authentic. That's another variable of what it means to be a performer. You have to go out there and not be afraid to do nothing or feel like you're doing nothing, because it's at least it's honest. It's something. It is a start to just be there, to just hit your mark and be there. You're not having to undo anything then. And it wasn't perfect. It was not perfect. But if you can just hit your mark and respond to people and try to have some kind of an inner life where you're setting some things up, while you're off stage or in your life outside the show, just thinking about things, thinking about hypothetical scenarios that might be able to relate to something that your character is called on to feel, then that's going to be more truthful, and that's going to be closer to being authentic, even if you did no research on veterans.
I think it's tough because the characters we were portraying were also not in the oldest stages of their life, right? Like, we were very much in our 20s or middle-aged or somewhere in there. So I think it's a little hard to relate that far of a generation. It's kind of tough. I think just with age too, like, opinions change, even people who served. And we were lucky enough that our producers had us meet several World War II veterans that came to see our show. Big honor. It was truly amazing. But it's kind of hard to get a connection or a story. So I think maybe personally I would be able to identify or open up a little bit more with, say, a Vietnam veteran or like a more recent veteran who's struggling with like a new family. You know, that's kind of what I had to portray and pretend to act in. So I think that's where my sympathy is strongest, maybe.
Does it make you think about the people who actually have to carry that stuff in real life?
It was really kind of cathartic and like healing to do this show, because we all collectively agreed we have a newfound appreciation for what this is, and the show focused not on the nationalism of being in the military and like all of that kind of stuff, but the individual sacrifice, and if anything, how the country has let individuals down once they're done and they're used, how they're kind of discarded and how you're on your own. So I think that refocused that appreciation back onto individual serving members and like maybe not understanding the struggles, but after physically having to pretend to live in that for 3 hours, and I was exhausted. And so I can't imagine having to do that in reality every single day.
You think maybe the reason you pulled inspiration to play a World War II vet from Vietnam has anything to do with your grandfather?
Absolutely. I think it's the only thing I can relate to. I really just have like that one experience to draw on, and it was a very formative one. I was also like very close with my grandfather, so I think that was just the easiest thing to do. I think that was kind of like my tribute, my goodbye, whatever have you.
Is there anything you've carried with you after this process?
What I took with me in general, after this show, had more to do with the experience of working in the theater and working with the other people involved with the project. They're all your collaborators in a way. Because I was doing such a specific thing, it's like I'm telling this one aspect of this one story. And specificity was how I was trying to get to what was truthful. Not like this overarching view of what it means to be a veteran in America in this period, and the broad strokes themes of the story or the narrative, thinking about what I need to do in order to feel a certain way on stage, because you can't I'm just gonna feel this. It's like, no, you have when you're an actor, you have to put yourself in a situation where you're doing something truthfully in order for some kind of feeling to come out. That's why when you're performing, like, an audience member might say something like, they might say something I was doing, I was like, I'm not even aware I was doing. I wasn't even aware I was doing, because that's how it should be anyway.
For me, the joy of Bandstand was honestly building close relationships with all of the guys in the Donnie Notie band. And I think that was also something that I could draw a parallel to with the musical, because these are 5 dudes from totally different backgrounds that all share something in common. And that was kind of the month for us. That sense of camaraderie with people who are going after the same thing as you, and that was beautiful. That's maybe the biggest thing that I took from it was I don't know. Yeah, it would have been a lot less fun if I didn't have those guys with me. And in the case of the musical, I think they all would have struggled a lot more if they didn't have those guys with them.
More than it being a war story, it was a story about brotherhood and like healing. And I think that made it more authentic and more personal and more cathartic as an actor, right? Because not only are we doing this for an audience, but like at the end of the day, we're artists. You do it for yourself, and you do it to heal or access some sort of real that's going on inside of you. And so I don't regret playing it that way. I think mission accomplished.